The sound was deafening, like the roar of a chainsaw tearing straight through the night sky. It wasn't just noise, it was the sound of fury with wings. I shoved the barn doors closed, slammed the iron bolt into place, and with one sharp knock against the wooden crate, I sealed their fate. The hive responded instantly. A living storm of wasps burst from the rafters in a black and yellow cloud of rage, their furious hum filling every crevice of wood and steel inside. Moments earlier, the HOA board had been smug, sipping wine, laughing, strutting around my barn as if they were hosting some fancy suburban gala. They thought they were untouchable, but the second those wings ignited, the smirks vanished. Wine glasses smashed on the dirt floor, chairs tipped over, and the air filled with screams as their perfect little world collapsed into chaos. Locked inside, they clawed at the heavy doors, shrieking in pure panic, trying to escape the very barn they said belonged to them. I stood on the outside in the cool night, arms folded, my jaw set. The sound of their panic mixing with the growl of the swarm was not cruelty. It was justice. These people had broken into my sanctuary, mocked years of sweat and labor poured into my family's land. Every nail, every board, every jar of honey from my hives carried history they didn't respect. Tonight, it wasn't me screaming at them to respect it. It was the wasps, and they listened. This wasn't an accident. This was planned. A line had been crossed, and tonight they learned that my land, my barn, was not theirs to claim. The HOA walked onto ground that didn't belong to them, and it struck back. And it struck hard. Drop a pin on any map in the world and I want to know where you're watching this from. Put your time and place in the comments below. I love seeing how these battles with power-hungry HOAs stretch across neighborhoods and continents alike. Because when I slid that bolt, when I let the wasps erupt, there was no turning back. The echo of that deafening hum rolled out into the quiet country night like a war siren vibrating in my chest bones. Their screams rose in pitch with every sting, every brush of wings against the skin they thought was safe. These were the same polished people who, only weeks earlier, had stood on my porch in perfect shoes and immovable smiles, demanding I hand over my barn for their community. Funny how quickly demands become pleas when the lights go out and nature answers. I leaned against the outside wall, feeling the rough grain of wood press into my shoulders as I listened. The pounding on the inside planks, the shrieking voices, every sound stitched back the story of how this war began. Back then, life was steady. My farm sat on 18 acres just outside Cedar Ridge. It wasn't much to the outside eye. No glossy pavement, no cookie-cutter subdivisions, just sweat and dirt, tools and chickens, rows of vegetables under Nebraska's sun. But it was mine, and that was enough. Passed down through 3 generations, every inch of it carried family memory. Every nail in that barn came from calloused hands. And inside that barn was more than tools. It was my workshop, my life's rhythm. Sawdust filled the air, honey jars stacked neat, and buzzing from my wasp enclosures in the rafters. Most folks curse at the sight of wasps, but I saw them differently. They were nature's soldiers, fierce and loyal to their territory. They kept the pests down better than any poison spray I could buy. I respected them, gave them space, and in return, they respected me. They reflected my philosophy perfectly. I wasn't looking for trouble. But God help anyone who brought trouble onto my ground. That trouble had a name. Mara Benton, newly crowned president of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. She strutted through her role like a queen in suburbia. Rules were her crown and punishment her scepter. Her smile was all shine, but her eyes were sharp like knives, and her blazer probably cost more than my pickup truck. When she first approached me, I knew immediately it wasn't curiosity that brought her to my gate. It was ambition, control. She made her demand plain. Your barn, she said with that fake politician grin, is wasted on one man. Think of what it could mean to the community. Meetings, fundraisers, movie nights, all right under this roof. I thought she was joking. I stared and asked, you mean the roof I pay taxes for? The barn I've repaired with these hands? Her grin twitched but didn't fade. Don't be selfish, Dylan. It's just a barn. I looked her dead in the eyes. It's not just a barn. It's mine. And you're not setting a single foot in it. That was supposed to be the end of it. One argument, one boundary set in stone. But Mara wasn't that type. Within the week, she returned, this time with a herd of clipboard-carrying cronies. They stalked around my barn like vultures circling, snapping pictures, muttering notes. I watched every move on my new cameras. When I boomed my voice through the speaker, "Can I help you?" Mara delivered her smirk straight into the lens. "We're conducting an assessment," she announced. "Your barn sits within HOA proximity. We may classify it as a community asset." My jaw locked. "It's private property." "Get off my land." She didn't even flinch. Just turned to her lackeys. Make a note about the paint. We'll draft a proposal. That's when it hit me like a hammer to the skull. This wasn't a nuisance. This was invasion. Not polite, not legal, predatory. Mara whispered her warning as she left. You'll regret this. And I did. Regret that I hadn't stopped her harder the first time. The flood came next. Letters, thick envelopes, notices dressed up in legal words, non-compliance, community integration plan, zoning oversight, each one sharpened with threats. I wasn't even part of their HOA, but they circled me anyway, trying to drag my barn into their net. Then came the betrayal. A weekend trip with my sister was all it took. When I returned, anger boiling from my neighbor Linda told me everything. They threw a party in your barn. At first I laughed in disbelief. Then I saw the evidence scattered like broken glass across my land. Cups trampled into the dirt, streamers tangled in branches, doors left cracked open. Inside was worse. My tools shuffled, my tables shoved aside. And worst of all, one of my wasp enclosures disturbed. Its lid nudged aside. The very creatures I nurtured poked at like toys while Mara and her board toasted under my rafters. Something snapped that night. Letters could be burned. Lawsuits could be ignored. But this? Breaking into my sanctuary, violating my work, mocking my guardians. That was war. I carried evidence by the armful to the sheriff. Photos of Mara with wineglass in my barn. Videos of tables dragged through dirt. Even footage of her picking up one of my honey jars like it was a party favor. The sheriff's answer? They'll lawyer up. Call it a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. As if trespassing and theft were just casual mistakes. Laws move too slow for snakes like Mara. She knew every crack, every stalling trick. Justice wouldn't come through paper. Justice had to come through me, and so I built the plan. I baited them softly, pretending to back down, making it seem like I had given up. I knew greed would pull them back in, and when they did, when they gathered under my roof again, I would let the wasps answer the demand I'd denied. Standing there that night, leaning against barnwood cool as stone, listening to chaos unfold inside, I knew it had worked. They wanted my barn. Tonight they had it. But not on their terms, on mine. And not empty. Filled with a swarm of fury, reminding them whose land this has always been. But I also knew it was only round one. Mara wasn't the type to crawl away. She would rise, gather her snakes again and strike back harder. At dawn, the evidence of her counterattack arrived in my mailbox, thick and smug. Their letter accused me of reckless endangerment and malicious conduct. It accused me of being the danger. The gall of it nearly split me with laughter. They trespassed, tampered, and stole, and now they dressed themselves as victims. I pictured Mara dictating every line, hair perfect, voice sharp, pretending she was Cedar Ridge's martyr. The rest of the town didn't know truth yet, but they would soon. That afternoon I called Linda. She came over with strong coffee, eyes sharp as knives. "What now?" she asked. I slid the HOA's letter across the table. She read, then snorted. "Unbelievable. They party in your barn, mess with your property, and now you're the one in trouble for defending yourself." "Exactly," I said. "I'm not letting them write the story this time." She leaned back slow, a grin creeping across her face. "You've got the videos. The cameras caught everything, didn't they?" I nodded. I had hours of footage saved on my hard drive. Mara smirking as she rearranged my workbench. Her board members carrying cases of wine through my barn. The entire fiasco preserved frame by frame. "Then it's simple," Linda said. "You go public. If they want to make this about community safety, let the community see who's really unsafe." It was a risky move, but I liked it. That evening, I uploaded several still images to the local Facebook group. Mara sipping champagne in my barn. A board member clumsily knocking over one of my tool racks. Guests laughing while my no. Trespassing signs lay ripped on the ground. I wrote a short caption. "When the HOA says they're protecting community values but instead break into private property, this is what it looks like. Cedar Ridge deserves better leadership." The post spread like wildfire. By midnight, it had been shared dozens of times. Comments flooded in half the neighborhood, outraged that Mara had crossed such a line. Some defended her, of course. There were always loyalists who couldn't see past her polished smile. But the tide was turning. For the first time, Mara wasn't controlling the story. The next day, she showed up at my gate. Her SUV idled by the road, its engine growling like a caged animal. She stepped out heels, clicking against the gravel, fury radiating from every pore. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Dylan?" she spat. I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the fence. "Exposing the truth. You trespassed twice. The town deserves to know. You're blowing this out of proportion." she snapped. It was a harmless community gathering. Harmless. I pulled out my phone and played a clip. In the video, Mara stood inside my barn, one manicured hand wrapped around a jar of my honey. She handed it to a guest with a flourish, smiling like a queen distributing gifts. "That doesn't look harmless to me," I said, her face drained of color. "That could be anyone." I paused the video and zoomed in. Her name tag, Mara Benton, HOA president, was clear as day. Silence hung between us, broken only by the faint buzz of a wasp circling nearby. I smirked. "Care to explain?" She straightened, regaining some of her composure. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "We have lawyers. We have influence. You're just one man with a barn and some bugs." "Wasps," I corrected. "And I've got more than that. I've got evidence, witnesses, and the truth. You can't spin this, Mara." For the first time since I'd known her, she looked rattled. Not defeated, not yet, but shaken. She turned sharply and stalked back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard the echo rolled across the fields. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to scare her off. But I underestimated how much power meant to Mara. 2 days later, more letters arrived. Anonymous complaints filed with the county about my wasp enclosures. Claims that they were a public health hazard. Dog walkers suddenly loitering suspiciously close to my property line, their phones out as if they were documenting violations. Someone even left a note stuffed under my door that read, "You don't belong here." The HOA always wins. It was intimidation, plain and simple. But intimidation works only if you let it. I met with Deputy Harris at the sheriff's office again. He was a solid guy, one of the few officials in town who saw through Mara's games. I handed him another flash drive filled with footage along with a folder of the bogus complaints. He whistled low. "She's doubling down. You sure you're ready for where this is headed?" "Absolutely," I said. "If she wants a war, she'll get own. But this time, I'm not just fighting back. I'm gonna make sure she pays for every inch of ground she tried to steal." Harris gave me a look that was half admiration, half caution. "Just keep it legal, Dylan. Don't give her any ammo." I nodded, though, in my heart. I knew the wasps were only the beginning. Mara wanted to play games with paper and politics. I was ready to answer with steel evidence and, yes, a swarm or two if she pushed me again. AC walked out of the sheriff's office. I could feel the weight of the battle ahead pressing down on me. Mara wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. But neither would I. The barn, the land, the legacy of my family, it all meant too much to surrender. And if that meant unleashing the fury of the wasps again, then so be it. The night after my confrontation with Mara, I barely slept. Every creak of the farmhouse felt like footsteps approaching. Every rustle of leaves outside stirred my instincts. I knew she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The HOA had too much pride, too much money, and too many connections for them to back down after being humiliated by a swarm of wasps. If anything, their arrogance would force them to retaliate harder. When the sun rose, I walked the perimeter of my property, inspecting every corner of the fence line. The grass was still wet with dew, and fresh tire tracks scarred the dirt road leading up to the barn. They weren't from my truck. Someone had been there during the night. My stomach tightened. I hurried to check the barn. The heavy wooden doors were still bolted from the outside exactly as I'd left them, but my cameras caught everything. Later, in the quiet of my kitchen, I replayed the footage. There she was, Mara standing at the edge of the field with 2 board members. They didn't dare come close this time, but I could see them pointing, gesturing, whispering like generals surveying a battlefield before the next assault. Linda stopped by later that afternoon, her face pale. "They're spreading rumors," she said breathlessly. "The HOA is telling everyone you keep dangerous insects as weapons. Some of the parents in town are saying your wasps are a threat to their children." I laughed bitterly. "So now my pest control is a public menace. That's rich." Linda didn't smile. "You don't get it, Dylan. They're trying to paint you as unstable, as someone unfit to live here. If they can make the town believe you're dangerous, they can push for zoning enforcement or worse." She was right. It wasn't enough for Mara to harass me with parties and trespassing. She wanted to destroy my reputation. And in Cedar Ridge, reputation carried weight. A farmer branded as reckless or hazardous could lose contracts, customers, even the support of neighbors. That night, I sat on the porch staring at the glowing windows of the HOA neighborhood across the road. Each identical house looked like a clone of the next, perfect lawns, manicured shrubs, and driveways lined with matching SUVs. It was a world that thrived on conformity, a world where individuality was stamped out like a weed. And here I was, the weed they couldn't tolerate. I knew I had to act first. The next morning, I went into town with a stack of printed photos. Shots from my cameras of Mara and her crew sneaking into my barn, pictures of the party, decorations, the spilled wine, the torn down no trespassing signs. I pinned them to the bulletin board outside the diner. taped them to the post office wall, even handed copies to the clerk at the hardware store. By noon, the town was buzzing louder than my wasps. At the feed store, an old rancher named Cole clapped me on the shoulder. Heard about what they did to your barn? Damn shame. Don't let those HOA suits push you around. This town's built on men like you, not them. His support meant more than I let on. But Aknu words wouldn't stop Mara. She needed to be cornered in her own game paperwork, law, and exposure. That evening, another letter arrived, hand-delivered by one of her lackeys. This one bore an official seal, notice of compliance review. They demanded I submit a community integration plan for my barn, outlining how it could be used to benefit the neighborhood. Failure to comply, it warned, would result in escalation to county zoning enforcement. I read it twice, then tore it clean in half. My barn was not theirs to integrate. Instead, I called my cousin Nathan, a lawyer in the next county. Over the phone, I explained everything. Every party, every trespass, every bogus letter. He whistled low. They're overstepping hard. Trespassing, harassment, even potential fraud if they're misusing HOA funds for these so-called events. Can we fight back legally? I asked. Absolutely, he said, but lawsuits take time. If you want immediate relief, we file for a restraining order against Mara and the HOA board. That stops them from stepping foot on your land while the civil case moves forward. I felt a spark of hope. Finally, a weapon as sharp as theirs. While Nathan prepared the paperwork, I worked on another front, my defenses. I reinforced the barn doors with steel brackets, replaced the locks with a keypad system, and moved several of the Wasp enclosures closer to the perimeter. Not to release them, but to remind anyone foolish enough to trespass that I wasn't bluffing. Signs went up on every corner of the fence. Private property trespassers will be prosecuted. Wasps on site. A few nights later, the HOA struck again. My cameras caught Mara and two men creeping up the driveway under cover of darkness. They carried clipboards and flashlights, whispering as they tried to document violations. One of them aimed his flashlight toward the Wasp enclosures, only to recoil when the insects buzzed angrily in response. I almost laughed watching them stumble back. This time I didn't confront them directly. Instead, I saved the footage and delivered it to Deputy Harris the next morning. He reviewed it jaw tight. Second trespass. Third, if we count the party, they're digging their own graves, Dylan. I'll file a report and add it to your case. By the weekend, the restraining order was official. Mara was served in front of half the neighborhood, a sight that sent whispers flying faster than gossip at Sunday service. Linda told me later that some board members were already grumbling, questioning her leadership. But Mara wasn't done. She called an emergency HO meeting, blasting out emails claiming I was the aggressor, that my wasps were a weaponized hazard threatening everyone. Nearby, she wanted to spin the story, make me the villain. Too bad I came prepared. When the meeting began, I was waiting just outside the HOA clubhouse with a laptop and a portable projector. As residents filed in, I played the footage on the side of the building. Mara unlocking my barn, her board hauling wine inside partygoers, trashing my tools, and finally her clutching that jar of honey with her name tag front and center. Gasps filled the air. Some residents stormed out of the meeting before it even began. By the time the projector shut off, Mara's empire had cracks running through every corner. She could shout, she could lie, she could deny. But the truth was in the footage, and Cedar Ridge had seen it with their own eyes. As I packed up my equipment, I felt the weight of the battle shifting. For the first time, Marla was on the defensive, and I wasn't done yet, because the war for my barn, my land, and my dignity had only just begun. The fallout from the public projection shook Cedar Ridge like an earthquake. For years, the HOA had operated unchecked. Its board members feared more than respected. They handed out violation notices like candy fine-dined residents for leaving their trash cans out too long and dictated what color shutters people could paint their homes. Most folks grumbled but complied. Mara thrived in that environment. Control was her oxygen. But when the video of her party in my barn splashed across the side of the clubhouse, her oxygen was cut off. The next morning, Linda called me nearly breathless with excitement. Dylan, you won't believe this. Half the neighborhood board has turned on Mara. They're whispering about misuse of HO funds, saying she authorized expenses without approval. People are furious. I smiled grimly. Good. Let them eat each other alive. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Cornered animals lash out hardest, and Mara was nothing if not vicious when backed into a corner. My hunch proved correct 2 days later when I received another letter. This time not from the HOA, but from the county zoning office. It claimed they'd received multiple complaints about my barn being unsafe, about my wasp enclosures being a biohazard, and about illegal commercial activities taking place on my property. I nearly tore the paper in half right there. Mara had escalated to pulling strings outside her HOA bubble. If the county bought her lies, they could slap me with fines, inspections, even force me to shut down parts of my farm. I phoned my cousin Nathan immediately. He chuckled darkly when I explained. Classic move. When they can't win legally, they weaponize bureaucracy. Don't worry, I'll draft a response citing property rights and pest management exemptions. But in the meantime, document everything. If inspectors come, we make sure the truth is impossible to ignore. That night, I moved through the barn with a camera of my own, narrating every corner of the space, the organized shelves of tools, the locked cabinets for equipment, the carefully maintained wasp enclosures labeled and documented like any agricultural operation. No contraband, no hazards, no illegal activity, just a farmer protecting his land. I uploaded the video to YouTube under the title, "The Truth About My Barn, What the HOA Doesn't Want You to See." Within hours, locals were sharing it, defending me in comment sections, tagging the county's social media accounts. If Marlo wanted a smear campaign, I was going to drown her lies in sunlight. The pressure on her intensified. At the next HOA meeting, residents demanded answers. Where had the budget for the party decorations come from? Why had HOA funds been used to rent catering tables that mysteriously appeared in my barn? Why were legal fees suddenly skyrocketing on the association's ledger? A man named Eric, one of the quieter board members, finally snapped. According to Linda, who attended, he stood up mid-meeting and said, "We followed Mara because we thought she had vision. Now all I see is someone who can't separate her personal vendetta from her duty. She's costing us money, reputation, and peace." The room had erupted in applause, but Mara wasn't finished scheming. The very next evening, my cameras caught her sneaking back onto my property. This time she wasn't in a blazer and heels. She wore dark jeans and a hoodie, her hair tied back, her face partially hidden. She thought if she looked less like herself, the cameras wouldn't catch her. She was wrong. I watched in disbelief as she crept toward the wasp enclosures. My heart slammed in my chest. She was holding a can of pesticide. "Not tonight," I muttered, grabbing my flashlight and shotgun before storming outside. The beam of my light cut through the darkness, landing squarely on her. She froze like a raccoon caught in headlights. "Drop it, Mara!" I barked. For a moment she hesitated, her knuckles white around the can. Then she let it fall to the dirt with a hollow clank. "You've lost your mind," I said, stepping closer. "Poisoning livestock. That's not just trespassing anymore. That's criminal destruction of property." Her voice shook the first crack in her perfect composure I'd ever heard. "They're dangerous. You're putting everyone at risk." "No," I cut her off. "You're the risk. You broke into my barn. You trashed my property. You lied to the county, and now you're trying to kill what doesn't belong to you." She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing there was no defense left. My cameras had caught everything. The pesticide, her face, her trespass. This wasn't hearsay anymore. This was hard evidence. The next day, I handed the footage to Deputy Harris. He shook his head in disbelief. "She's cooked. Between this and the restraining order, the DA could charge her with attempted destruction of agricultural property. That's serious time, Dylan." A part of me felt vindicated. Another part pied her. Mara had built her identity around power, but now the very tools she used to control others, fear, intimidation, lies, were snapping back at her like a wasp sting. Still, I knew better than to assume the battle was over. Marlo wasn't the type to surrender gracefully. She'd thrash, she'd scream, she'd drag others down with her if she had to, and the hostel existed as an institution, one that might try to protect itself, even if it meant throwing her to the wolves. That night, I poured myself a stiff drink and sat on the porch, staring out at the barn. The hum of the wasps inside was steady, almost comforting. They were like me, territorial, relentless, unwilling to bow to invaders. "Keep buzzing," I whispered to them. "We're not done yet." And deep down, I knew the real showdown was still coming. The moment when either Mara would be crushed under the weight of her own arrogance, or she'd take one last desperate swing that could drag us both into ruin. One way or another, Cedar Ridge would never be the same. By the time autumn rolled in, Cedar Ridge had become a battleground. The leaves on the trees turned amber and gold, but beneath the beauty, tension poisoned the air. Every trip into town felt like stepping onto a stage where half the audience cheered for me, and the other half whispered behind my back, parroting Mara's claims that I was some kind of madman with weaponized wasps. But I wasn't the one breaking laws. She was, and I knew her pride wouldn't let her rest until she made one last move. That move came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday night when I got the alert on my phone. My cameras had picked up movement near the barn. At first, I thought it was raccoons, but when I tapped into the live feed, my jaw tightened. There they were, Mara and 4 HOA board members, dragging folding tables, chairs, and even a projector screen straight through the gravel path. They were dressed in casual clothes this time, hoodies and jeans, as if trying to disguise themselves. But there was no mistaking who they were. And just like that, my plan slid into place. 4 weeks, I'd been waiting for them to make this mistake again. I had left one side of the barn camera conspicuously missing, a subtle invitation that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't watching as closely anymore. I even let the front gate lock hang loose one evening so they'd think I was careless. It was bait, plain and simple, and like greedy fish, they had bitten down hard. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way through the fields. The night air was crisp, my breath fogging in the beam of the moonlight. As I approached the barn, I could hear them laughing inside, already setting up as if the place belonged to them. I slid the heavy doors shut and dropped the steel bolt into place. The clang echoed like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. For a second there was silence inside. Then the shouting started. "What the who locked this?" Someone yelled. "Try the other door," another voice snapped. I stood outside calm as a stone listening to their panic. My fingers drummed against the wooden crate sitting near the vent. Inside, the wasps had grown restless from all the commotion, their wings buzzing like a live wire, waiting to spark. "Who's out there?" Mara's voice rang sharp and furious. "Open this door immediately. You're committing a crime," I smirked. "Funny, that's exactly what I was going to say to you." I gave the crate a firm knock. The vibration set the swarm off. The sound was like nothing else on Earth. Thousands of wings vibrating in unison, rising into a frenzy. Within seconds, the first few wasps slipped through the-slats of the vent and into the barn. The reaction inside was instant. Screams. Desperate, uncoordinated shrieks that pierced the night. Chairs clattered. A table overturned. Someone bellowed, "They're everywhere. Get them off me. Don't swat. Don't swat," another voice cried. But panic drowned out reason. I leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold in my mind as clearly as if I were standing inside. My wasps weren't bred to kill, but anyone trapped in a tight space with them would feel the sting of trespass written on their skin. Mara's shriek cut above the rest. "You'll pay for this, Dylan Harper. Do you hear me? You'll pay." Her words were shaky, desperate. Not the commanding tone of a queen, but the flailing cries of someone who'd lost her grip on power. I let them sweat for several minutes. The buzzing grew louder, the screams wilder. Then, with deliberate calm, I slid the bolt free and pulled open the door. They came pouring out like rats from a sinking ship. Hair, disheveled faces steer with sweat and fear, swatting frantically at the air. One board member sprinted across the field without even looking back. Another tripped and crawled on his hands and knees until he cleared the barn's threshold. And then Mara appeared. Her blazer was gone. Her once perfect hair tangled her face pale. Her eyes locked on me with pure venom. She staggered forward, clutching at her sleeve where a welt was already rising. "You're insane," she hissed, her voice raw. "You've endangered lives. This is assault." I shook my head slowly. "No, Mara, this is me protecting my property. You broke in again. You set up in my barn again. You ignored every warning, every law, every shred of decency. And now you've reaped exactly what you sowed." Behind her, the other board members looked less like allies and more like deserters. Their glares weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at her. Whispers of "I told you this was a bad idea" floated through the night. For the first time, Mara stood alone. She clenched her fists, trembling with rage. "This isn't over." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until only she could hear. "It is over, Mara, because this time I've got everything on camera. You breaking in, you trespassing, you setting up for your so-called community event. You don't get to spin this anymore. The sheriff will see the footage. The judge will see it. And Cedar Ridge will know who you really are." Her lips quivered, but no words came out. She turned humiliated and stalked off into the night with her defeated entourage trailing behind her. When the field fell silent again, I glanced back at the barn. The wasps were calming down their hum, fading back to the steady rhythm I knew so well. I whispered a quiet thanks to them, my unlikely allies in this war. That night I didn't sleep either, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation, because I knew tomorrow morning when I handed the footage to Deputy Harris, the scales of justice would finally tip in my favor. Mara had crossed the line for the last time, and now she would pay. The morning after the Wasp incident, I woke to a silence so thick it felt unnatural. No letters shoved into the mailbox, no strange cars idling near my driveway, not even the usual joggers from the HOA neighborhood across the road. It was as if Cedar Ridge itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window with my laptop. My cameras had captured everything. Mara and her board members dragging equipment into my barn the way they jumped when the bolts slid into place. The flailing chaos as the wasps poured down from the rafters. Every angle was clear, every face unmistakable. I clipped together the footage into a clean chronological file and labeled it HOA Trespass Final Evidence. Then I loaded it onto a flash drive and slid it into my pocket. At 9 sharp, I drove to the sheriff's office. Deputy Harris met me in the lobby, already expecting me. He ushered me into his office, closed the door, and leaned forward with a serious expression. "Tell me you got it all." I handed him the flash drive. "Every second. You won't believe the stupidity until you see it." He plugged it in, and together we watched the events unfold on his monitor. Mara's smirk as she crossed into my barn. Her cronies setting up tables like they were hosting a wedding. The bolt sliding into place. And then the panic, the swarm. The stampede out the door. Harris whistled low. "Good Lord," he muttered. "She just buried herself." "You can charge her, right?" I asked. He nodded. "Trespassing, breaking, and entering attempted destruction of agricultural property. Given this is the third documented incident, the DA is going to salivate over this. And her board accessories, they're in the same boat." A weight lifted from my chest, but it wasn't relief yet. Not until I saw Mara actually face the consequences. By noon, word had spread. It always did in small towns. A few curious neighbors lingered at the edge of my driveway, whispering. One woman called out, "Dylan, is it true you locked them in with wasps?" I didn't answer directly. "It's true they trespassed," I said firmly. "And it's true I've got evidence." That was enough. Within hours, Cedar Ridge's Facebook group was on fire again. Some accused me of being reckless. Others hailed me as a hero for standing up to Mara. Memes circulated photoshopped images of Mara running from a cartoon swarm of giant wasps, captions like "Queen Bee meets real stingers." Linda stopped by in the afternoon, grinning ear to ear. "You've done it, Dylan. The board is fracturing. Eric resigned this morning. 2 others are demanding a vote to suspend Mara. They're calling her toxic a liability." I leaned against the porch railing, sipping my coffee. Took them long enough, but Marlo wasn't the type to go quietly. That evening, a new letter arrived, not in the mailbox this time, but shoved under my door. The handwriting was sharp, angry, almost carved into the page. "This is not finished. You will regret humiliating me. You'll regret ever crossing the HOA," I laughed bitterly. Even now she clung to the delusion of power, as if a handwritten threat could erase her crimes. I slipped the note into an evidence folder and locked it away. Every move she made was just more rope to hang herself with. 2 days later, the county inspectors arrived. Clipboards in hand, neon vests gleaming, they walked the perimeter of my barn with tight expressions. "We've had several complaints," one of them said, eyes flicking to the wasp enclosures. I braced myself. This was Mara's last weapon, bureaucracy. If they ruled my farm unsafe, she could claim victory even in disgrace. But I was ready. I showed them the meticulous records. I kept the maintenance logs, the pest control exemptions under state law. I walked them through the barn, pointing out every safety measure I'd installed, locks, ventilation signage. When they tried to push, I countered with statutes I'd studied late into the night. After 3 tense hours, the lead inspector closed his clipboard. "Everything appears compliant. The complaints were exaggerated." I couldn't resist smirking. Exaggerated, try fabricated. When they left, I knew the tide had fully turned. Mara's last gambit had failed. That weekend, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The clubhouse parking lot overflowed with cars, residents buzzing louder than my wasps. Linda attended and later recounted the chaos to me. People tore into her, Dylan, parents furious. She put their kids at risk by sneaking into your barn. Members demanding to know how much HOA money was wasted on her parties. She tried to spin it, of course. Claimed you manipulated the footage, that you staged the whole thing. But no one bought it. Not after the inspector's report cleared you. And then I asked. Linda's eyes sparkled and then they voted. Mara's out, removed as president. Effective immediately. The words settled over me like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. For months, she had poisoned my life, invaded my land, twisted the truth, and now she was finished. Or so it seemed. The following day, I saw her for what I hoped would be the last time. A moving truck backed into her driveway. Boxes stacked on the porch. Mara stood by the curb phone pressed to her ear, gesturing furiously. But her posture was different. No longer regal, no longer commanding, just frantic, defeated. When she noticed me watching from across the road, her eyes burned with hatred. For a moment, I almost pied her. Almost. I raised my coffee in a mock salute. "Need help packing?" Her jaw clenched, and without a word, she turned her back. By sunset, the truck was gone, and so was she. Cedar Ridge felt different after that, quieter, lighter. Neighbors who'd once avoided me now waved from their driveways. Parents brought their kids by to see the chickens, even asking cautious questions about the wasps. The HOA board, under new leadership, sent me a formal letter of apology and our reimbursement check for damages. I never thought I'd live to see the day. But most of all, I had my land back, uncontested, untarnished, mine. As I walked the fields that evening, the barn stood proud against the fading light, its wood glowing gold in the sunset. From inside, the wasps hummed their steady song, a reminder that even Thesmolest, fiercest creatures could protect what mattered. Mara had underestimated me. She had underestimated them. And in doing so, she had sealed her own downfall. Yet, some part of me couldn't shake the thought people like Mara don't just disappear. They fester, waiting for another chance. Maybe one day I'd hear her name again tied to some other scandal in some other town. But here in Cedar Ridge, her reign was over and my farm, my barn was free. When Mara's moving truck rolled out of Cedar Ridge, most people thought the saga had ended. Neighbors whispered with relief. The HOA board scrambled to rebuild its tattered image. And for the first time in months, my farm felt safe again. But I knew better. Legal battles don't vanish. When the villain drives away, they linger like smoke after a fire. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope in the mail. This time, it wasn't another empty HOA letter. It was stamped with the county court seal. Inside was a notice. Civil case pending Harper via Cedar Ridge, HOA. My cousin Nathan had filed the lawsuit we'd prepared. Trespass, property damage, harassment, conversion. The legal term for when someone takes or uses your property without permission. And we had the evidence, the videos, the photos, the inspector's report, even the note Mara had scrolled in rage. For once, I wasn't on defense. I was the one dragging them into the arena. Nathan called that evening. They're going to try to settle fast, he said. The board knows Mara poisoned their reputation. They'll want this swept under the rug. Good, I replied. But we're not letting them off easy. They need to pay literally and publicly, he chuckled. That's the spirit. Don't worry, I'll push for maximum damages. You'll get compensation for the barn repairs, lost honey sales, legal fees, the works. It wasn't just about the money. It was about principle. The HOA had tried to crush me under their rules, their threats, their arrogance. Now they were the ones squirming. Meanwhile, the story spread beyond Cedar Ridge. The local newspaper had already run 2 articles about the barn wars, as they called it. Then, a regional news outlet picked it up. Their headline still makes me grin. HOA president ousted after wasps used as unlikely defense. Before long, my inbox was flooded with reporters asking for interviews. Some wanted the gritty details of the feud. Others wanted tips and alternative pest control methods. I agreed to one interview on a local radio station. The host introduced me as Theman, who fought back against an HOA with nothing but grit and a swarm of wasps. I corrected him quickly. It wasn't about the wasps. It was about standing your ground. When bullies think they can take what isn't theirs, listeners called in afterward, sharing their own HOA horror stories. One man said he'd been fined for leaving his garage door open too long. A woman recounted how she was forced to remove a vegetable garden because it clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Their voices were laced with the same frustration I'd carried for months. It struck me then my fight wasn't just personal anymore. It had become a symbol. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Mara, disgraced and ousted, tried to claw back her narrative. She gave a statement to a local blogger calling me unstable and accusing me of staging the entire Wasp incident. He manipulated footage to frame us, she insisted. But the weight of evidence crushed her words. Every denial made her look smaller, more desperate. The HOA board, desperate to salvage their standing, distanced themselves quickly. They issued a public apology, claiming Mara had acted unilaterally and promising reforms. But the damage was done. Families who once worshipped the HOA's order now muttered about wasted dues and corrupt leadership. Attendance at meetings plummeted. The board had lost its grip. Meanwhile, Nathan pressed the lawsuit forward. In depositions, board members cracked under questioning, admitting they had followed Mara into my barn without written authorization. One even confessed they had known the party was illegal, but didn't want to upset her. Their cowardice was my weapon. Finally, the board offered a settlement, full reimbursement for damages, a payout for emotional distress, and a legally binding agreement that the HOA would never again attempt to claim jurisdiction over my land. Nathan called it a victory. I called it justice. When the settlement check arrived, I stared at it for a long time. It was more money than I'd expected, enough to repair the barn, upgrade the farm, even expand the wasp enclosures into a proper agricultural research project. But it wasn't the dollar amount that mattered. It was the acknowledgement, the official stamp that said they were wrong. I was right. The strangest part came after a university entomologist reached out, having read about my case. He wanted to study the way I maintain the wasp colonies for natural pest control. You may have stumbled into a model for sustainable farming, he told me. I had to laugh. My private feud with the HOA was now being discussed in academic circles. As for Mara, her downfall was spectacular. Word spread that she tried to run for a similar position in another neighborhood 2 towns over. They rejected her immediately, citing her reputation. Rumor had it she was renting a small condo alone, far from Cedar Ridge. Her once perfect image shattered. One evening, as I hammered a new sign onto the barn private property, "Trespassers will be prosecuted. The Wasps remember." Linda walked up smiling. "Never thought I'd see the day." She said, "The queen dethroned the kingdom humbled and you still standing." I smiled back. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who stood up. "You, Harris, Nathan, and the Wasps, of course." She laughed. "Can't forget them." We stood there in the fading light, listening to the steady hum from inside the barn. It was a song of resilience, of nature's raw power, harnessed not for cruelty, but for justice. The HOA had wanted my barn as their community center. Instead, it had become a monument to defiance, to truth, and to the sting of consequences. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The dust had finally begun to settle. With Mara gone, the HOA disarmed, and the lawsuit closed in my favor, Cedar Ridge felt like a different place. The once pristine neighborhood across the road still looked the same. Identical lawns, identical mailboxes, but there was a shift in the air. The people who once looked at me with suspicion now nodded politely, even waved. Some of them even brought over baked goods or jars of jam as peace offerings, as though they'd suddenly remembered what it meant to be neighbors rather than enforcers. I spent the first week after the settlement restoring my barn. I replaced broken boards, polished the workbenches, and scrubbed the last sticky stains from the HOA's wild party. It was tedious work, but it was healing too. Each nail driven into the wood was like reclaiming another piece of my dignity. When the repairs were finished, the barn looked sturdier than ever. The Wasps, of course, never cared about the chaos. Their nests hummed with the same steady rhythm, their wings slicing the air like little engines of nature. I'd move them into reinforced enclosures, not just for safety, but also to remind anyone who might pass by that they were permanent residents of this farm. To me, they weren't just insects anymore. They were a symbol of defiance, of patience, of sting when provoked. But victory is rarely neat. Even with Mara gone, rumors swirled. Some claimed I'd gone too far, that locking people in with wasps was cruel. Others whispered that I was a folk hero who had shown the HOA bullies their place. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. I hadn't sought glory. I'd sought respect for boundaries. One evening, Linda joined me on the porch. She brought her usual thermos of sweet tea and plopped down in the chair beside me. "So," she said, staring out at the glowing barn, "do you think it's really over?" I considered her question. "Over with Mara? Yes. Over with the HOA. Maybe not. Power doesn't just die, it finds new hands." She nodded. "Still, you've shown them you're not a man to push around." I chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe I've just made myself the one guy they'll never stop whispering about. She leaned over and clinked her thermos against my glass. Better whispered about than walked over. That night after she left, I stood at the edge of the field and looked back at the barn. A new sign hung on the door, the one I'd hammered in after the lawsuit. "Private property, the Wasps remember." It wasn't just a warning to trespassers. It was a promise to myself. Weeks passed and life slipped into a rhythm again. I harvested vegetables, repaired fences, and spent evenings sketching plans for expanding the farm. Nathan encouraged me to use some of the settlement money to build a second structure. A greenhouse maybe, or even a small honey processing shed. "Turn your fight into growth," he said. I liked the sound of that. Meanwhile, the new HOA board made sweeping changes. They cut dues, scrapped half the old rules, and even sent out a letter asking residents to propose their own community projects. For the first time, Cedar Ridge felt less like a dictatorship and more like a neighborhood. People credited the Wasp War for the reforms, though the board avoided mentioning it outright. And Mara, the last I heard, she'd left the state entirely. A mutual acquaintance spotted her in a grocery store, 2 towns overlooking Gaunt and Bitter, muttering to herself in the checkout line. She was a ghost now, no longer queen, no longer feared. Just another reminder that arrogance once stripped of power crumbles into dust. One afternoon, while repairing a section of fencing, I found myself thinking about everything that had happened. About the night I slammed the barn doors shut and let the wasps defend what was mine. About the fear on Mara's face when her empire unraveled. About the neighbors who had chosen silence until the truth screamed too loud to ignore. And I realized something important. The real victory wasn't that I'd won against Mara. The real victory was that I hadn't let her change me. I hadn't given up my land, my identity, or my right to stand firm. I had fought back, yes, but I'd also chosen restraint. The wasps hadn't been a weapon to destroy. They'd been a reminder of boundaries, of consequences. That night, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in molten gold, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea. The hum from the barn drifted across the yard, steady and constant, like the beating heart of the land itself. I thought of my grandfather who had built this farm with his hands. I thought of my father who had taught me that land isn't just dirt, it's history, blood, and memory. And I thought of the generations to come who would inherit a place that had been defended not just with nails and wood, but with resolve. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The HOA had tried to claim me barn. Mara had tried to crush my spirit. But in the end, they'd learned the hardest truth of all. Some things can't be stolen, borrowed, or bullied into submission. Some things fight back, and sometimes those things buzz. Looking back, the battle with Mara taught me more than I ever expected. It wasn't just about keeping a barn or winning a lawsuit. It was about the value of standing firm when you know you're right. Boundaries matter. Respect matters. And when people try to trample on those things, silence only feeds their power. What stopped Marlowe wasn't anger alone. It was preparation, evidence, and the courage to act. In life, we all face our own HOAs, people or systems that try to box us in, strip us of individuality, or make us doubt our worth. But you don't have to fold. You can defend what matters with wit, with grit, and yes, sometimes with a swarm of wasps if that's what it takes. If this story struck a chord with you, share your own battles in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because around here, every fight has a lesson.